the Pasuk Aleph Chamishi, Zion. Vahi biyom kalos Moshe lohokim Mishkan. When Moshe completed erecting the Mishkan, and we mentioned the Yibshech, he anointed it, he sanctified it, so on and so forth. So Rashi cites Chazal that the patach under the kuf, kalos, ksiv, biyom hakomas Mishkan hu yishol kakala nechnes l'chuppah. That on the day that the Mishkan was established, it took on that permanent status, it was like a bride entering into the chuppah. So we had mentioned, if we read a little bit later, when did the Shekhinah come into the Bishkan? On the 8th day. That was the day that it took on that permanent status. This is when Aaron and his children began officiating. That's beyond Kalos, Hakomas HaMishkan. And the Shekhinah entered, and all the Jews, they prostrated themselves. So the Shekhinah entering, when we came, and the Shekhinah enters, it was like a kala entering into the chuppah. That was that event at that moment. Similar to Sinai. We came to Sinai, the Shekhinah was there, except the Shekhinah departed because of the Chet Egel. By the Mishkan, the Shekhinah came onto the terrestrial level on a permanent level to be here and to return. As a result of that, therefore, it's like a kala entering into the chuppah. That's what it is. There's a beautiful medrash Tanchuma. In Hebrew, the word vai means woe. Vai means woe. So the medrash says, Vayhi b'shalach, Vayhi b'yom kalos. It was woe. The angel said on the day that the Mishkan was established to take on a permanent level, the Malachim says, woe to us. Why woe to us? Because the Malachim said, until now, where was the Shekhinah? The Shekhinah was in heaven with us. But now that there's the Mishkan, and the Mishkan's taken on a permanent status, the Shekhinah is leaving us and going to be with the Jewish people. So the Malachim was saying, woe to us, that the Shekhinah is abandoning us and going to the Jewish people. That's vayihi. Vayihi. Woe to us, kalos. Woe to us, because the Mishkan was completed now. It's woe to us. Now we take this loss. So Hashem says to the Malachim, no, my Shekhinah is still in heaven. Still in heaven. I'm not abandoning you. So the Medrash says it was Tanchumim Shel Hevel. It really was an appropriate or a satisfactory consolation. Why? Because when Hashem left heaven to go to earth, his main location is with the Jewish people. But rather, what he meant to say was, we will still have a relationship. But in terms of where's my primary location, it's no longer in heaven, it's on earth. And he quotes a pasuk, we say every morning in Psukei Zimra. We say every morning in Psukei Zimra, Hodo al eretz vishamoyim. Right? We complete one of the halukas. Hodo al eretz vishamoyim. God's splendor is al eretz vishamoyim. His primary splendor is eretz, and also shamoyim. So the shamoyim, the heaven, is secondary to the eretz. That's what he said to them. Not what I'm doing now doesn't mean what you think, but rather what Hashem meant to say was, my primary location is the Mishkan, or the Beis HaMikdash. What we'll also have, it also have relevance to Shamayim. You'll also be part of the equation, but not as originally. We find, the Gemara tells us in Shabbos, that when Hashem was going to give the Torah to Klal Yisrael, after Moshe had been in heaven, the Malachim say to Hashem, Erish Masas Kerena. Man is so fickle, he's not worthwhile mentioning. Therefore, you should leave your splendor in heaven, not give the Torah to Klal Yisrael. So there they were speaking specifically the Torah. So Hashem says to Moshe, Moshe, answer them. It's Gemara in Rabbi Akiva. It's the name of the chapter. Moshe, answer them. So Moshe says to them, to the Malachim, it says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Tzisicha Me'eretz Yisrael, the first of the 10 commandments. I'm your God, took you out of Egypt. Were you ever in Egypt? So you see clearly you have no relevance to Torah. It says, honor your father and mother. Do you have a father or mother? It says, lo sachmod. You should not have designs on your fellow's wife, his property. Does that have any relevance to you? That was Moshe's response. And as a result of that, the Malachim was silent. So we asked the question many years ago. I mean, he says to Moshe, Moshe, you answer them. I mean, Hashem could have given the same answer. The way the text reads in the Torah, it's clear it has no relevance to you. Why did Moshe have to give the answer? He says, Moshe, Anei Lehem, you answer them. So we had said then we have discussion, famous Gemara in Bava Metzia, which we had, where Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Lezer, the story with that earthenware oven which became contaminated, and then they cut it into parts and they reconstructed it. So the question was, when it was reconstructed, was that considered like a new oven, or was like the original oven, and therefore anything that's in there is contaminated? Rabbi Lezer ben Hurkanis held it was like a new oven. Chacham say no. When you rebuild that oven, it's like the original oven, therefore it retains its contamination. Therefore, any taros that were put in there are contaminated. So Rabbi Lezer said, if the halacha is like I say, this was the conclusion, let a basko come out of heaven and say, halacha Rabbi Lezer. A basko comes out of heaven, Shemayim, and says, halacha Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Yeshua stands up and says, lo b'Shemayim hi. It's not for God to decide. When the Torah is given at Sinai, it's under the direction, the auspices of the Bezdin, of the Jewish people. You gave us to make that decision. As long as we work within the parameters of the Yud Gil Midrash HaTorah Nidreshet, from the 13 methodology we interpret the Torah, it's not based on divine understanding, but it's based on human understanding. As long as we operate within the parameters that was prescribed by Hashem himself. And he said, Lo b'Shemayim, that was the end of the story. And the halacha is like the Chachamim, that the oven was contaminated. And it says they burnt all the tyros of Rebbe Lezer that were put in that oven. Lo b'Shemayim. When the Shrin, now, there we're talking about the Torah. What is the basis to have a relationship with Hashem? Bereshis bara Elokim, for the sake of Torah, for the sake of the Jewish people. The intent of creation was that God should be on the terrestrial level to have a relationship with Klal Yisrael, due to their own worthiness. That was the objective of creation. But that objective only comes, what is the connector? What is the catalyst that connects us to Hashem? The famous Zohar, Yisrael v'Oraisim Kuch B'richu Chatu. The Jewish people, the Torah, and Hashem are all intertwined. We're one entity. The way we mesh, the way we cleave to Hashem is through the Torah itself, through the spiritualization of the Torah. That's what it is. Therefore, when the Malachim said, the angel said, what are you giving the Jewish people the Torah? They're fickle. They're not even worth mentioning. Hashem said to Moshe, Moshe answered. Moshe had to answer them, because that was giving over the decision rights, that it's for us to decide what exactly is the Torah in terms of its application to us. That's why Hashem said to Moshe, Moshe, you answer them. It's not for me to answer them. It's you to. You have to acquire it. That's part of the acquisition of Torah. So when the Mishkan was completed, the Shrin came into terrestrial level. So initially it came on Sinai. What happened? Because of the Chet Egel, it detached itself. Due to Moshe's tefillah, it returned, but when? Only through the medium of the Mishkan, then the Shekhinah comes back to us again. But again, this is, and that's why the Ramban writes that the Mishkan itself, if you take a look at the various characteristics of the Mishkan, it's a replication of Sinai. It's just as Sinai says there was fire, The Mishkan, the Holy of Holies, was all gold. The Aron, everything in that area was gold, because gold has the same color as fire. It's a replication of Sinai. Just as at Sinai, we surrounded the mountain. The Mishkan was the parameters were determined by the crushing, the vertical beams which circumscribed the location itself. And once the beams were erected and things were put into place, the Shrin went in there. Then it took on that function of the Mishkan. Exactly Sinai. Sinai, it came, it descended, then it ascended because of the Chet Egel. When did it return? With the Mishkan, but that was a continuation. The Mishkan was a replication of Sinai. That's the Ramban. So again, what was the Mishkan when it was completed? Vayib kalos Moshe lahokim es Mishkan. That was when the Shekhinah came to the terrestrial level to be permanently with the Jewish people. Therefore, this Vai, the angel said, woe to us. It's no longer as it originally was. Because originally the Shekhinah was only in Shamayim, only in heaven. Now its primary location is on the earth, together with us. That's the understanding. Now, this next Rashi, it's very interesting. It says, when Moshe completed the Mishkan. I mean, we know that Bezalel was chosen by Hashem to oversee the building of the Mishkan. Meaning he directed all the artisans in terms of not only the physical, how it should be developed through their artisanship, but even the kavanah, there was intent. Every aspect of the Mishkan had to be infused with an intent, because the Mishkan, as we discussed, was a microcosm of creation. And that's why we learned the Lamates Malachos. The 39 creative activities are learned from the Mishkan, because those creative activities represent the creation of the world. The Mishkan itself, and that's why the Gemara tells us in Brachos that Betzalel Hayodea Letzarf Osi Sheniv B'Olam. He knew how to conjugate the letters of the Aleph Beis, that through those letters creation came about. Because it wasn't just a physical edifice, but rather it became functional to touch every aspect and activate every spiritual energy, because it was the replication of existence, and the same energies that brought about existence infused in the Mishkan were those identical energies. Therefore, it functioned, it was the equivalent of existence. So if Bezalel and Oliov, who was his assistant, oversaw the Mishkan, why do we only speak about Moshe Rabbeinu? He calls Moshe. It says when Moshe, Bezalel, and Oliov, when they completed the Mishkan, so on and so forth. So Rashi cites Chazal, calls Bezalel v'Oliov v'chol chacham leiv, also was a Mishkan. Bezalel v'Oliov and all those who had chochmas halev, which was a divine gift. The Torah kosu b'Moshe, but yet it only mentions Moshe. Everything is ascribed to Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, there's a question. We find by the Mishkan that the mitzvah, when it was given directly to Moshe. Moshe, you do this, and Moshe, you do that. So Rav Chaim HaKadosh made a point over there that the mitzvah of the building of the Mishkan was given to Moshe Rabbeinu. Klal Yisrael were only the agents of Moshe to bring about that agency. But it was Moshe's mitzvah. And the Rav Chaim HaKadosh explains over there, because Hashem wanted that Moshe should be the beneficiary of the building of the Mishkan, that they themselves are only Moshe's agents. So it's a little bit difficult. So we're asking the question, why does it say Yom Kalos Moshe? What about Betzalel, Liov, and what about Kol Chachmei Leiv? But according to Rav Chaim HaKadosh, we discussed, there is agents. If you appoint an agent to marry a woman, even though the agent did the action, who married the woman? The husband married the woman. It's considered the wife of the husband. So over here, if all the people, Oliyav, Betzalel, Chacham Leib, were all Moshe's agents, what's the question? Why to say Moshe? Because it was Moshe. Moshe within the context of shlichus, of agency, Moshe built a Mishkan. But yet Chazal asked the question. And they give an answer, which is not the answer which you're speaking about. As the Or Chaim says, that they were Moshe's agents. Was the connotation Loka means in the physicality. He was the one who physically built the Mishkan. Not within halacha contents. Within halacha, it's attributed to him. But in reality, who built the Mishkan? Who was responsible? It was Betzalel, Liov, and Kol Chachmei Lev. So why is it only attributed to Moshe, not to them? That's the question Chazal are asking. On that, they answer, because Moshe Rabbeinu, he gave his life for the Mishkan, meaning he was fully committed. Liros kavnis kol dover dover, koshereu behor. The form and the structure, everything that was in the Mishkan had to conform to what Moshe had seen at Sinai, which he was shown by Hashem. There was a fiery blueprint that was given to Moshe and says, this has to be replicated. And Moshe communicated that to Betzalel. But who was the first one to see it firsthand how that had to be? So Moshe oversaw, Betzalel was involved in the actual direct relationship with the artisans and all that. But in terms of where did it begin, and Moshe therefore was meticulously involved to make sure it matched and it conformed to everything you saw at Sinai. Shereu Bahar Lahorid Lahoros Lose Melocha, to instruct those artisans, and there were no mistakes. It was done perfectly. Stop. So because he was Moshe Nafsho Olav, therefore it's attributed to him. Who built the Beis Hamikdash? Shlomo Melech. But David was Moshe Nafsho bin Beis Hamikdash. Shenemar Zechor Hashem leDavid es kol unuso asher nishba Hashem. Remember David. David says because he was afflicted, he was pained, and he didn't leave a stone unturned that he should be able to build the Mishkan, the Beis Hamikdash, and he purchased the property where the Beis Hamikdash was built. That property was purchased by David. And David even wanted to build the Beis Hamikdash, and he was pained. How could he live in a palace and the Shrin is not in something which is the equivalent of that? Hashem says it's not for you to do; it's for your son to do. But because all the so-called the prerequisites and all the pre-preparation and all the energies were set in place by David, Shlomo only actualized it. But the reason why everything fell into place was because of David's investment. His pain and his tefillah that it should manifest itself the way David wanted it to be. So why did Shlomo succeed and was able to do it to that degree? And why did it have that level of functionality? It's only because David was afflicted and pained and was mispal and prayed that it should be as it was. So what Shlomo did, he only brought it to fruition, but the actuality of its innate value, that was due to David. It's Moshe Nafsho Olav. Lefichach nikra shmo shneimar rei beischo David. Medrash cites another pasuk. It says Mizmo Chanukas Habayis LeDavid. He sang the Chanukas Habayis was LeDavid. So the Medrash asked, "What do you mean LeDavid?" It was what? It was Shlomo. And the Medrash answers what Rashi is saying over here, because David was Moshe Nafsho. He gave his life for the building of the Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, it's attributed to him. Therefore, it's Mizmo Chanukas Habayis LeDavid. When the Chanukas Habayis took place, it was for David, because David's intent and all his investment, which he had put into it, actually came to fruition. That's the Medrash. So the Medrash concludes that any person who invests and is dedicated to something, and then eventually manifests itself through some other person, it's attributed to that person. Okay. So it comes out something very interesting. We speak about zchus avos, right? A person is able to succeed in his life within the spiritual realm, because he has chosovos. Because in a previous generation, he had a forefather, and it's in his merit that he has this grandchild, that the grandchild was able to succeed. Now, there's a famous story, as I always say, famous if you know the story, that in the late 40s, there was a kibbutz movement in Israel, and there was one group who established kibbutzim in Israel. It was known as Shomer HaTzoyer. The Shomer HaTzoyer was atheistic. They were anti-religion. And that's what the kibbutz. They didn't believe in God, nothing. It was like a real commune over there. And in the late 40s, the Chazon Ish lived in Bnei Brak, and the Chazon Ish was the first and last opinion in Israel regarding any halacha and Torah position and perspective. And if you remember in the 60s and the 50s, the pictures, you have these young Israeli teenagers or young men. They used to wear it was called a temba hat. They would climb these ladders and pick oranges in the orange groves. It was a hat that came up almost like it was propped up their heads. It had like a crown on it. And they would have their sleeves rolled up and they'd pick these oranges. So about 15 of these boys show up in the Panovich Yeshiva. It was a fledgling yeshiva. The Panovich Rav just built it, but it already was functioning. And they come to the yeshiva in their shorts, in their rolled up sleeves with their temba hats. And they say, we want to learn Torah. We want to know about Judaism. So they said, we're not really geared. We don't have a curriculum for you people because you people have no background. But they said, we want to study. We want to know what the Torah is all about. They didn't know what to do. So they went to the Chazon Ish. They asked what to do. So Chazon Ish says, you must create a curriculum to accommodate them that they should be able to study Torah as everybody else studies Torah. And then the Chazon Ish started to cry. He said, it's interesting. The grandparents of these young men, they were very observant Jews, committed Jews. And when all the movements in Europe, communism, anarchism, socialism, whatever it was, the children, they abandoned Judaism. Gave it up, no Shabbos, no kashrus, no tefillin, nothing. So what did the parents do? What did the fathers and mothers do? They went to the shul and they opened the Quran Kodesh and they cried tears, unlimited amount of tears, praying to Hashem that Hashem should save their children and bring them back. That's what happened. And this repeated itself, unfortunately, endless times. The parents saw the children abandoning whatever they hoped would be the future. So the Chazon Ish says, the tears of these parents, of these grandparents, great-grandparents, that's what brought these children back. That's why these children are coming back. That's what the Chazon Ish said. And that's why he cried. He was so moved and touched by this. Therefore, he says, you must create a curriculum for them to teach them which they missed out because of this detachment for these past few generations. So over there, seemingly, it's not just chosovos. Here, the grandparents were pained because they wanted their children, grandchildren to be connected to Torah. So the reason why they were brought back, why did they come back? It's a merit of those tears. So it could be all their Yiddishkeit, and if they became observant, whatever they did afterwards as Jews is attributed to those grandparents. It's the same idea. They were Moshe Nefesh, as Moshe was Moshe Nefesh. Therefore, even though the actual building was Oliov and Bezalel and the artisans, and although Shlomo built the Beis HaMikdash, who's it attributed to? It's attributed to David, it's attributed to Moshe, because Moshe Nafshe Olav, because they dedicated themselves and they created all the background that all the energies were in place. You just have to actualize it, and then everything falls into place. Yom Kalos Moshe Lahokim. It says when Moshe completed erecting it. It doesn't say when he erected, when he completed erecting it. Lo nema b'yom hokim. The 7 days of Miluim, this is when Moshe officiated, he would erect it and then dismantle it. And on the 8th day, Hamido Perko. He erected it and he did not dismantle it. This is when it took on a permanent status. When he completed erecting it. He finishes all the dismantling and erecting it. He completed it. And what was this day? Rosh Chodesh Nisan Hoyo. That was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That was Biyom, that's V'hi Biyom Hashmini. So we asked the question, now, why did Moshe, where was he the one who erected the Mishkan? So the famous Midrash, Moshe Rabbeinu did not participate in the actual physical development of the Mishkan, and he was down. He was a little disappointed that he didn't have the opportunity. Why? Because everybody else completed it, and by the time he came around to do what he thought he had to do, it was completed. So Hashem says, your participation has greater value than theirs. Why? Because they may have built the Mishkan, but you'll have Hakomas Mishkan. Because unless you erect it, it has no value. It has no value. It's only when it becomes that erected structure and then becomes functional. And the Medrash tells us that the Jews themselves, they tried to erect the Mishkan. And when they couldn't erect it, they come to Moshe and say, Moshe, help us out. We can't put it up. So, and as a result of that, Moshe erected the Mishkan. Physically, it had a level of weight. Humanly, it wasn't possible. So Moshe says, how am I supposed to do it? He says, don't worry. Just put your hands under the beams. They're going to rise by themselves. You do yours, I'll do mine. That's what Hashem said to Moshe. So the question is, and I asked this question many times, if you write a Sefer Torah, and Moshe Rabbeinu, you were able to ask Moshe Rabbeinu to write a letter in your Sefer Torah, wouldn't you want Moshe Rabbeinu to write a letter in your Sefer Torah? Moshe Rabbeinu, he brought the Torah from heaven. He radiated holiness. He saved the day, brought a second set of luchos. Were reinstated with the Mishkan. You build a Mishkan, you don't include him in it. I mean, how do you leave him out? How do you forget about Moshe Rabbeinu? How do you have him not do something in it? And they would have erected it if they could. But Hashem did not perform the miracle on their behalf because he wanted Moshe Rabbeinu to be the one to actually erect it. And there's no claim against them whatsoever. How did you forget about Moshe Rabbeinu? We brought up this point in the past. The Nisim, they were reprimanded because they waited till the last moment. Because they said, what they don't do, we'll complete. And because they realized that there was barely anything to do, they were nearly left out. And because of that, so it's attributed to their atzlus. And they atzlusam, because they were laid back, as a result of that, they were reprimanded. If the word Nisim is written with the Yud deleted. That even though they were diamonds, it's considered deficient. It's a deficient gift. Because they should have been there immediately. Now, it's attributed to atzlusam. What's the atzlus? Atzlus is there's a certain laziness. If a person appreciates the innate value of something, it's impossible to resist. It's only because there was a blind spot due to their atzlus. So that they came up with this calculation indicates they fully did not appreciate the value of building the Mishkan. And therefore they were reprimanded. The Jews, the reason it's in one day they put everything together. Despite the amount of material that was needed and the preciousness of the material, they didn't meet. Why? Because the Jews heard this is going to be part of your reinstatement. We have an opportunity to get back where we were originally. It's something which is impossible to resist. So that was a confirmation of their understanding of the value of having a relation with Hashem. Therefore, it's seen as a positive. When a person appreciates something at that level, you go all the way. Therefore, they would have even erected the Mishkan. But because Hashem wanted Moshe to be the one to erect the Mishkan, humanly it was impossible. Therefore, Hashem did not perform the miracle on their behalf. So that they didn't think of Moshe Rabbeinu, it wasn't as a result of a negative, it was a positive. It's something they wanted. They were consumed with getting back to where they were. That's the reason why they didn't think about Moshe Rabbeinu. Therefore, we don't find any mention that this was a shortcoming of Klal Yisrael by not having Moshe Rabbeinu participate. And they would have completed it totally. Moshe says no. Hashem says no. That's for Moshe to complete. Humanly, they couldn't raise it, to erect it. Moshe Shalchem Gedol Shalem. Moshe, your participation has greater value. They may have built it, but they're not going to be able to erect it. And that's yours to do. We say, Ha'avim Mekalkelis is Ashura. Avram Avinu was 137 years old, time of the Akedah. We're going to have to stop. He was a man, he was an older man, he had wealth, he had servants, he had slaves, he had hitch his own donkey. So Chazal tell us that Ha'avim Mekalkelis is Ashura, because of his overwhelming, all-consuming love for Hashem, there was no, at that moment, there was no Avram Avinu. There was no 137-year-old man, there was no wealthy man, there was no, all that was exists that moment to do the will of Hashem. As a result of that, if it has to be done, you do it. You don't think about yourself. Therefore, that's Avram Mekalkelis is Ashura. He was consumed with love for Hashem. Therefore, all that existed in his mind was the will of Hashem has to be addressed. Okay.
Rabbi, can you repeat that again?